After about a decade of providing a free online service, Nintendo decided to start charging $20 a year on the Switch, which I suppose isn't poop if you can afford the console in the first place. But instead of making actual improvements to the service itself, the above average size end decided to just randomly throw NES and Super Nintendo games at us once every blue moon. So basically they're holding subpar online gameplay hostage, with the ransom being that we rent a bunch of 20 to 30-year-old games from them. Regardless of how you feel about that, though, it can't be denied that the NES definitely has a bunch of games that can definitely be considered among the best in space and time. However, due to licensing issues, legal fees, certain games not being available in English, or certain rights holders just being winkies, there's plenty of fantastic games that Nintendo's just never going to be able to put on this type of a service. So pour yourself a glass of prune milk, barricade your door, dial this phone number if you think anybody's ever trying to get in, and allow me, YouTube's second strongest proctologist, Cameron all one word, to tell you the 9 best NES games that Nintendo's never going to be able to lock down for the Switch's online service.
Number 9. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project. If you were to ask me for some good 2-player NES games, I'd probably just stall for time and escape the first chance I got, but thanks to Turtles 3, I'd at least have something to tell you before I seamlessly wandered off into the night. The only reason why this game's so low on the list, despite being what I consider to be the best 2-player and beat-em-up on the NES, is because Nintendo actually did sell the first Ninja Turtles game of all things on the Wii, so, I mean, there is a chance that licensing won't be an issue for this one. But sadly, since Nintendo probably knows that no one's buying the service just to play games in the first place, there's no way an HE single hockey stick that they'd pony up the dough. And even if they did, it'd just make way more sense to get Turtles in time for the Super Nintendo anyway. But still though, Manhattan Project's most likely going to be overlooked once again. Number 8. Kokoron. This game's somewhat obscure, but it was created by the actual creator of Mega Man, Akira Kitamura, along with a group of disgruntled game designers who quit their respective employers to start their own super company. Don't worry though, the mighty number 9 guy wasn't involved with this one. Sadly, this super company didn't exactly work out, but we did get a couple of great games out of the deal, with the first being Kokoron, which was never released outside of Japan. It's an action platformer similar to Mega Man, but instead of playing as a pre-made mascot, you actually get to create your own character and choose the attacks yourself. So if you're like most people and won't play half of the games that have ever been made because the main character reminds you of your alcoholic stepson, then Kokoron just might be the game for you. Personally, I'd rather not have to worry about designing my own character outside of appearance, because I feel like premium stage design can only realistically be done with specific mechanics in mind. However, I must say that they still did a pretty good job here, and it's definitely ambitious as hell for the time it came out. The reason why it's not going to end up on the Switch though is because, like I said earlier, it was never even released outside of Japan, but even more so than that, it was never even re-released on anything, period. If anybody watching this video actually knows who owns the rights to this game, then please contact this number right here so we can see that it gets an official release. Otherwise, it looks like downloading it online is the most morally correct thing to do. Number 7. Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu. Even though Jackie Chan no want trouble, it's pretty much a given that he'd probably dish some out in Nintendo's general direction to try to get him to include this hidden gem to the Switch's online service. The basic gist here is that you play as some full-grown man who looks like the Chinese adaptation of a British Jackie Chan, and the goal is to save your sister. The platforming's fun, the music's great, the graphics are impressive since it's a later NES game, and you also get to punch frogs in the face while roundhouse kicking tigers. Normally I'd test animal cruelty more than most things in the world, but if Jackie Chan's doing it, then I must admit it is pretty cool. If I need to further explain why a video game that starts with Jackie Chan under a waterfall is a great addition to the online service, then you probably don't deserve to play it anyway.
I said I don't want trouble.
Number 6. Zombie Nation. This game won't get the NES snub due to licensing issues or anything like that, but you can bet that since it's a third-party game, Nintendo's probably not going to go out of their way to secure it when it's about a dismembered human head destroying society. I mean, you're actually trying to fight zombie armies and trying to free the human race of a zombie spell brought upon them by an evil meteor or something like that, but you couldn't tell that just by looking at the gameplay. And yeah, I know Nintendo's got M-rated games way worse than this one on the Switch, but all the NES Online games so far happen to be family-friendly, so it seems unlikely that N-Dog would even bother trying to find out who owns the rights to this one. Especially when most people don't even know this game exists in the first place, which I think's a damn shame, by the way. Number 5. Bucky OHara. I know I may be a little bit biased being a Mega Man guy, but these really are the types of games that the NES did best, and Bucky OHara's at the top of the list as far as this genre is concerned. You pick your stage order, listen to an awesome soundtrack, look at pretty graphics, shoot everything you see, and then you get grounded for saying the fuck word too many times thanks to the difficulty. This game really did check off all the boxes of what makes a great Mega Man clone. Since Bucky OHara was originally a somewhat obscure comic book character, many people just assumed that this was a random game made by Konami. But seeing as how everyone's favorite pachinko company doesn't even own the license to this anymore, we're probably never going to see an official release for this game ever again, much less on the Nintendo Switch's online service. Number 4, Sweet Home. If you love Resident Evil, then you may or may not like this game. I don't know, I'm not a psychic or anything like that, but Sweet Home's pretty much like Resident Evil's grandma. It's an 8-bit survival horror game where items are scarce made by Capcom, just with an RPG twist. Although I suppose it's not really a twist if this game actually came first. Oddly enough, Resident Evil was actually supposed to be a remake of Sweet Home before it turned into something different. So naturally, a game this historic should be represented as an NES great, right? Well, maybe for the Famicom app, but since it was never made for children, it never saw an international release back in its heyday, which means that it's probably gonna remain a Japanese exclusive forever. Because I mean, you know, it's not like a big corporation like Capcom to just spend an afternoon translating a 30-year-old game or anything like that. Oh well, maybe if we make enough phony phone calls, they'll eventually cave and translate it. But even if that day ever comes, I doubt Capcom would just hand it off to Nintendo for their online service. Number 3. Digital Devil Story Monogatari Megami Tensei 2. Speaking of Famicom games that need to be translated into English, this one right here is at the top of the list. I don't know the full story behind the English fan translation, because the more I look into it, the more confused I get, but apparently this guy named Douchebadge who's been translating it said it was about 85% done in 2010, never to be heard from again. So now people want the Stardust Crusaders who translated the first game to finish the job. The whole thing's a friggin' mess, and of all the JRPGs on the Famicom, this one seems to be the best one we don't have in English yet. This is the second Megami Tensei game in the entire series, which eventually became Shin Megami Tensei, which eventually became Persona, which eventually became Persona Dancing, yada yada yada, you get it. But with there being so many remakes and remasters of old Final Fantasy games, you'd think that Atlus would follow suit with some of their old Japanese exclusives. Like every other game on this list, though, if that ever happens, it's damn sure not being handed off to Nintendo. I mean, Nintendo didn't even put their own translated game onto the service. So sorry to say, but I don't think we're gonna get this game in English anytime soon.
If not, then I guess you could borrow my physical copy, but just make sure not to save over my file.
Number 2. New Ghostbusters 2. North American NES owners had to endure hell with the Ghostbusters games, but Japanese and PAL territories had an awesome game made by HAL Laboratories of all people. But since HAL's never going to be able to re-release this game without jumping through a million legal hoops due to the Ghostbusters license, it's easy to understand why they never wanted to deal with the headache of putting anime characters into Smash Bros. New Ghostbusters 2 is not the greatest game of all time or anything like that, but it's really hard to put down once you start playing. Plus, the soundtrack's super catchy, and just look at all these sprites. Pretty cool, huh? If I were HAL Laboratories, I'd just change some stuff around and call it a Luigi's Mansion game, just so this hidden gem wouldn't have to stay stuck on the NES forever. I know that might sound crazy, but I dare say that it's crazy enough to actually work. It's just probably not worth the effort, though, since subscriptions probably wouldn't even increase all that much as a result. Still, though, a full-grown boy can dream, can't he? No? Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Number 1. Little Samson. Not only is this one of my favorite NES games of all time, but it's actually one of my favorite games, period. Remember when I talked about those disgruntled designers who started their own company and made 2 really good games? Well, Little Samson's the second one they made, and I really can't stress enough that they absolutely hit the ball out of the park with this one. It's basically a linear Mega Man game with no power-ups, which sounds really bad to word it that way, but personally, I think this is actually better than all the NES Mega Man games due to the game design. And instead of creating a character like Kokoron, you can actually choose between 4 different ones at any point in the game, who all have their own strengths and weaknesses. And I'm pretty sure at least one of these 4 doesn't resemble that alcoholic stepson we talked about earlier, meaning that Little Samson really does have it all. But since it costs about $87 billion on eBay, you're much better off illegally emulating it since there's no way to support the original creators anymore anyway, and the reason we can't support them is because nobody will friggin' let us. Seriously, why has this game never been re-released even on mobile devices? I have no idea who owns the rights to this game. It was published by Taito, but since the developers Takuru are about as alive as my wife's passion for our marriage, I don't know what can be done to get this game out in front of more people who don't watch YouTube videos about obscure NES games. There's clearly an interest for games like this, and this one was even officially translated in English, so whoever owns the rights to it should just straight up stop being a bitch and let somebody else re-release Little Samson again. I mean, even just giving it to Nintendo to put it on the online service would require 0 effort and make the rights holders some free money. But if we haven't seen a re-release for this game almost 30 years later, then it's not looking very likely that we're ever going to see this game again, let alone on Nintendo's online service. And since there's no way to legally support so many classic NES games, then the best option to play them is just add ROMs to a hacked NES Classic Edition or just use emulators. Which I would never condone since it's against the law, but you should totally just do it.
And anyway, that's all for today, though. If you liked this video, then you should check out my video about Persona Q1 versus Persona Q2. If you'll excuse me, though, I gotta go arm wrestle YouTube's strongest proctologist so I can be the champion once and for all. Later!
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty. Thank you for your support.